Welcome back to the journey. There comes a moment in human relationships when silence begins to speak louder than words. It is not the loud silence of conflict, but the quiet realization that something once familiar is slipping away. When a person senses they are losing you, they are not merely afraid of absence. They are confronting a fracture within their inner world. You were not just a presence in their life, you became a mirror, a symbol, a reflection of something unresolved inside them. When connection forms, it rarely stays on the surface. It descends into the unconscious, weaving itself into identity, memory, and meaning. Losing you feels less like losing a person and more like losing a part of themselves. That is why their reaction will not be logical, calm, or predictable. It will be driven by forces they themselves may not fully understand. At first, they may deny it. The psyche resists loss the way the body resists pain. They will tell themselves nothing has changed, that distance is temporary, that control still exists. But the unconscious is patient, it waits, and when denial collapses, something deeper rises to the surface. Fear does not always appear as fear. Sometimes it disguises itself as indifference, anger, or sudden affection. When they feel you drifting, their shadow awakens. The shadow holds everything they have ignored: insecurity, possessiveness, regret, and longing. These hidden parts do not ask for permission. They emerge abruptly. That is when the unexpected happens. They may reach out after a long silence, not with explanation, but with intensity. They may say things they never said before, reveal emotions they once hid, or make promises that surprise even them. This is not strategy, it is instinct. The unconscious is attempting to restore balance, to reclaim what feels essential to survival. Or they may do the opposite. They may pull away completely, disappear, or act as though you no longer matter. This too is a reaction. When the ego feels threatened, it sometimes chooses self-protection over vulnerability. If they convince themselves they do not need you, they can avoid confronting the pain of losing you. In some cases, they will transform, not slowly, not gently, but suddenly. They will change their behavior, their priorities, even their identity. This change is not always healthy. It is often an attempt to regain control, to become someone who cannot be abandoned. Reinvention becomes a defense against grief. What makes their actions unexpected is not what they do, but why they do it. They are not responding to you alone. They are responding to an internal crisis. Your absence activates old wounds, unmet needs, and forgotten fears. You have become the symbol of something they once lacked, something they cannot easily replace. Human beings are not disturbed by loss itself, but by what loss reveals. When they feel they are losing you, they are forced to face their dependency, their vulnerability, and the parts of themselves they hoped would remain hidden. The psyche reacts strongly when its illusions are threatened, and so they act, sometimes impulsively, sometimes dramatically, sometimes in ways that make no sense on the surface. But beneath it all is a simple truth. Losing you feels like losing stability, meaning, and self-coherence. Whether they come closer or move further away, their unexpected action is an attempt to resolve inner conflict. It is the unconscious seeking wholeness, even if it does so clumsily. What they do next is not really about you. It is about the battle within them, between fear and acceptance, control and surrender, attachment and individuation. And in that moment, when they feel you slipping away, the soul reveals itself in ways the mind never planned. When a person senses they are losing you, the experience does not remain confined to the relationship itself. It reaches far deeper, touching the structure of their identity and disturbing the image they hold of who they are. Human beings often believe they relate to others from choice and preference, but much of attachment is rooted in unconscious necessity. You become more than a companion, you become a reference point through which they recognize themselves. Your presence quietly confirms their value, their role, their stability, and when that presence begins to fade, the foundation beneath their sense of self begins to tremble. Identity is rarely built in isolation. It forms through reflection, through being seen, understood, and responded to. When they were with you, parts of them felt coherent and real. Certain traits emerged only in your presence. Certain emotions felt permitted. Certain vulnerabilities felt safe enough to exist. Losing you threatens not only the bond, but the continuity of their inner narrative. The question is no longer, will I lose this person? But who am I without them? This is why the reaction feels disproportionate. To the outside observer, it may seem excessive, dramatic, or confusing, but internally, the psyche experiences it as a symbolic death. Something familiar is dissolving, and with it, the stability of the ego. The ego relies on consistency to maintain its sense of control. When a relationship that once felt secure begins to slip away, the ego interprets it as danger. At this stage, the mind attempts to protect itself by clinging to old patterns. Memories are replayed, conversations are analyzed, small signs are magnified. The psyche searches desperately for reassurance that the bond still exists. This mental repetition is not nostalgia. It is an effort to preserve identity. If the relationship can be saved, then the self does not have to be redefined. But beneath conscious thought, another process unfolds. The unconscious recognizes that something irreversible may be happening. Old attachment wounds awaken. Past experiences of abandonment, rejection, or emotional neglect resurface, even if they were never consciously remembered. The current loss merges with earlier losses, intensifying the emotional response. What feels like fear of losing you is often fear of reliving an old pain that was never fully processed. This inner crisis creates tension between who they believed themselves to be and who they might become. If you leave, the version of themselves that existed with you may no longer survive. That version may have been more confident, more expressive, more alive, or simply less alone. The thought of its disappearance creates anxiety that has no clear language. It manifests instead as restlessness, mood swings, sudden urgency, or emotional withdrawal. Control becomes an obsession at this point. When identity feels threatened, the psyche seeks something to hold on to. They may try to regain influence over you, over the situation, or over themselves. This can appear as sudden effort, unexpected confessions, or drastic decisions. These actions are not calculated. They arise from the fear of disintegration, from the need to prevent the inner world from collapsing into uncertainty. There is also shame involved. To admit that losing you destabilizes them is to admit dependency, and dependency contradicts the ego's desire for autonomy and strength. This creates inner conflict. One part of them longs to reach out, to express vulnerability, to restore closeness. Another part resists, fearing exposure, humiliation, or loss of dignity. The result is inner turmoil that leaks into behavior. As the crisis deepens, projection intensifies. They may attribute their fear to external causes, convincing themselves that you are changing, becoming distant, or intentionally withdrawing. This projection protects them from confronting the deeper truth that their sense of self is entangled with your presence. To recognize this would require confronting their own incompleteness. The feeling of losing you also challenges their illusions about permanence. Relationships often serve as anchors against the uncertainty of existence. When an anchor loosens, existential anxiety emerges. Questions about meaning, worth, and direction quietly surface. Even if they are not consciously articulated, they influence emotional reactions. The loss threatens not only connection but orientation. At its core, this crisis is an invitation to transformation, though it rarely feels that way. The psyche is being pushed toward individuation, toward discovering a self that is not dependent on external validation. But growth is rarely welcomed when it arrives through loss. Resistance is natural. Fear dominates before insight appears. Until that insight emerges, they remain caught between holding on and letting go, between preserving an old identity and facing the unknown. The intensity of their reaction reflects the depth of what is at stake internally. Losing you is experienced as losing structure, meaning, and coherence, and the psyche reacts as it always does when its inner order is threatened, with urgency, confusion, and unconscious attempts to restore what once made it feel whole. Fear rarely announces itself honestly. It does not always appear as trembling, tears, or open confession. More often, it disguises itself behind behaviors that seem unrelated or even contradictory. When a person feels they are losing you, fear does not remain a quiet emotion inside them. It becomes a force that reshapes their actions. This fear is not only about separation, but about what separation awakens within them. It activates unresolved wounds, forgotten insecurities, and emotional memories that were never given language. At the surface, their behavior may suddenly change. They may become distant, irritable, overly confident, or strangely calm. This calm is not peace, it is emotional anesthesia. When fear feels too threatening, the psyche numbs itself. Withdrawal becomes a way to reduce exposure to pain. By pulling back, they attempt to protect themselves from the intensity of loss, even if that withdrawal accelerates the very separation they fear. For others, fear moves in the opposite direction. It becomes urgency. Messages arrive without warning. Emotions are expressed that were once tightly controlled. They may seek reassurance repeatedly, needing constant confirmation that they are still valued. This behavior can feel overwhelming or confusing because it is not measured. It is driven by an unconscious need to stabilize their inner world before it collapses. These reactions are not choices made with clarity. They are automatic responses shaped by earlier experiences. The psyche remembers moments when connection was lost before, especially during formative years. If love once disappeared suddenly, fear learns to anticipate abandonment. If vulnerability was punished or ignored, fear learns to hide behind detachment or anger. When they sense they are losing you, these old patterns reactivate instantly. Insecurity sits at the center of this process. It is the quiet belief that they are not enough to be chosen freely. When your presence becomes uncertain, this belief grows louder. Every silence feels meaningful. Every change in tone feels like confirmation. The mind fills gaps with imagined threats because uncertainty is more frightening than even a painful certainty. Unresolved wounds do not stay buried when fear is triggered. They rise to the surface demanding recognition. Past betrayals, emotional neglect, or unspoken grief begin to influence perception. They may accuse you internally of intentions you do not have, not because you deserve it, but because their inner world is reliving something old. You become the current face of a much older pain. This is why their behavior can feel irrational. Fear distorts perception. It narrows awareness and amplifies threat. They may misinterpret neutrality as rejection or independence as abandonment. The nervous system enters a state of alert, searching for signs of danger. In this state, reason loses authority and instinct takes control. Sometimes fear expresses itself through control. They may attempt to influence your choices, your emotions, or your availability. Control creates the illusion of safety. If they can predict you, manage you, or secure your attention, the fear temporarily quiets. But control is never rooted in trust. It is rooted in the belief that without constant effort, loss is inevitable. In other cases, fear manifests as self-sabotage. They may push you away intentionally, create conflict, or behave in ways that almost guarantee distance. This seems contradictory, but it serves a purpose. If they cause the loss themselves, They do not have to experience the helplessness of being left. Pain chosen feels safer than pain imposed. Unresolved wounds also influence how they interpret their own emotions. They may feel shame for needing you, anger at themselves for feeling weak, or resentment toward you for having the power to hurt them. These emotions mix and clash, producing behavior that feels inconsistent and unpredictable. The unexpected nature of their actions comes from this internal chaos. Fear does not follow social rules or logical plans. It reacts to inner images, memories, and sensations that exist below conscious awareness. What you see on the surface is the result of an invisible struggle happening within them. At a deeper level, fear is attempting to protect the self from disintegration. Losing you threatens the emotional structure they relied on. Fear steps in as a guardian, even when its methods are destructive. It believes that by acting quickly, dramatically, or defensively, it can prevent collapse. Until fear is recognized and understood, it will continue to drive behavior from the shadows. It will shape reactions, distort intentions, and produce actions that surprise both you and them. These behaviors are not expressions of who they truly are at their core, but reflections of unresolved pain reacting to perceived loss, moving instinctively to defend an inner world that feels suddenly unsafe. When a person feels they are losing you, the parts of themselves they have long kept hidden begin to surface. These are not new qualities being created in the moment. They are old elements of the psyche that were once pushed aside because they felt unacceptable, uncomfortable, or dangerous. Under ordinary circumstances, these aspects remain buried, held in check by social roles, self-image, and conscious control. But when emotional stability is threatened, the boundary that keeps these parts contained weakens, allowing them to emerge. The shadow consists of emotions, impulses, and traits that were never fully integrated into the conscious personality. It includes fear, jealousy, possessiveness, resentment, and longing, but also vulnerability, tenderness, and the desire to be deeply seen. These elements were often suppressed because expressing them once led to rejection, shame, or loss of control. When they sense you slipping away, the energy required to keep the shadow hidden becomes unavailable. This surfacing often feels sudden and intense. They may express jealousy even if they once appeared secure. They may reveal dependence after years of independence. They may show anger that seems out of proportion to the situation. These reactions are not calculated responses to the present moment. They are the release of emotions that have been accumulating beneath awareness for a long time. The shadow does not emerge politely. It does not wait for the right words or the right timing. It breaks through in moments of vulnerability, because vulnerability weakens the defenses of the ego. When the ego can no longer maintain its ideal image, what has been denied demands expression. The psyche seeks wholeness, even if the process is disruptive. This is why their behavior may seem contradictory to who you thought they were. The calm person becomes reactive. The rational person becomes impulsive. The emotionally reserved person becomes overwhelming. These shifts are not signs of deception. They are signs of incompleteness being exposed. You are witnessing parts of them that were always there but never permitted to exist openly. The surfacing of the shadow often brings confusion and shame. They may not recognize themselves in their reactions. They may feel embarrassed by their own intensity or frightened by how strongly they feel. This internal conflict can lead to oscillation between expression and suppression, moments of emotional honesty followed by sudden withdrawal. When the shadow emerges, it often seeks an object onto which it can attach itself. You become that object because you are the catalyst. Their fear, longing, and anger may all become directed toward you, even if you are not the true source. The psyche externalizes inner conflict because it is easier to face outside than within. This process can create a distorted dynamic. They may idealize you one moment and devalue you the next. Idealization is a way of preserving hope. Devaluation is a way of protecting against disappointment. Both are driven by the same fear of loss, and both arise from the shadow's attempt to manage unbearable emotion. The emergence of suppressed vulnerability is often the most unsettling part. Needing someone challenges the ego's image of strength and autonomy. When that need becomes undeniable, it can provoke resistance. They may judge themselves harshly for feeling weak or dependent, which then turns into frustration or blame directed outward. At the same time, qualities that were never fully developed may appear. They may suddenly express honesty they previously avoided or acknowledge emotions they once dismissed. Loss strips away pretense. When the future feels uncertain, the psyche prioritizes authenticity, even if it arrives clumsily. The shadow's emergence is not inherently negative. It represents an opportunity for integration, for becoming more whole, but integration requires awareness and responsibility. Without these, the shadow acts autonomously, driving behavior that feels compulsive and uncontrollable. In the context of losing you, the shadow is activated because attachment reveals dependency, and dependency threatens the ego's illusions. The psyche responds by unleashing what was hidden, not to harm, but to survive. It is an attempt to reclaim lost parts of the self in the face of separation. Whether these emerging qualities lead to growth or destruction depends on whether they are recognized. If the person becomes conscious of what is rising within them, the experience can deepen self-understanding. If not, the shadow will continue to express itself through reactions that feel surprising, intense, and emotionally charged. What you are witnessing in this moment is not simply someone reacting to loss, but someone encountering their own hidden depths. The loss of you removes the mask they learned to wear, allowing suppressed emotions to surface without structure or containment, revealing the complexity of a psyche struggling to reconcile fear, longing, and identity under the pressure of separation. When a person takes sudden action after sensing they are losing you, it often appears impulsive, dramatic, or even irrational. Yet beneath the surface, these actions are attempts to restore an inner balance that has been disrupted. The psyche depends on equilibrium to function. When a meaningful connection begins to dissolve, that balance is threatened, and the inner system reacts with urgency. What looks like unpredictability is the psyche's effort to stabilize itself before fragmentation sets in. Inner balance is not simply emotional comfort. It is the feeling that one's inner world makes sense. Your presence may have provided coherence, a rhythm, a sense of order. When that stabilizing force weakens, disorientation follows. Thoughts scatter, emotions intensify, and the individual feels internally ungrounded. The sudden actions that follow are attempts to re-establish structure, even if they are poorly chosen. Avoidance of loss plays a central role in this process. Loss is not only painful, it forces confrontation with reality. To truly accept loss means acknowledging powerlessness, limitation, and impermanence. For many, this confrontation feels unbearable. The psyche, therefore, seeks alternatives. Actions that create the illusion that something can still be done, that control has not been fully surrendered. These actions may take many forms. They may suddenly confess feelings that were long suppressed, hoping honesty will restore connection. They may make dramatic gestures, promises, or sacrifices as proof of commitment. Action becomes a substitute for reflection. Doing something feels safer than sitting with the emptiness of potential loss. In other cases, sudden action appears as escape. They may change environments, routines, or even relationships quickly. Movement creates the illusion of progress. By redirecting attention elsewhere, they attempt to outrun the emotional weight of losing you. This is not healing, it is displacement. The inner imbalance remains, but it is temporarily masked by novelty or distraction. Avoiding confrontation with loss also means avoiding confrontation with the self. Loss exposes dependency, unmet needs, and unresolved fears. Sudden actions act as a barrier against introspection. If the mind stays busy reacting, it does not have to reflect. Reflection threatens to reveal truths that may demand transformation. The psyche prefers familiarity, even painful familiarity, over uncertainty. When the future becomes unclear, regression often occurs. They may revert to old habits, coping mechanisms, or relational patterns that once provided comfort. These behaviors feel unexpected because they contradict the person's recent growth or self-image, but under stress, the psyche reaches for what it knows. There is also an unconscious hope embedded in these actions. Hope that something external can restore internal harmony. Hope that if the right move is made, the discomfort will disappear. This hope fuels impulsivity. It bypasses patience and understanding, favoring immediate relief over long-term integration. Sudden actions are also a way of preserving meaning. When a relationship ends, it threatens the story they told themselves about their life. Acting allows them to feel that the story is still unfolding, that it has not reached a conclusion they are not ready to accept. Movement keeps the narrative alive. At a deeper level, these behaviors reflect resistance to transformation. True balance cannot be restored by returning to what was. Loss demands adaptation. It requires the psyche to reorganize itself without the external support it once relied on. Sudden actions often aim to recreate the old equilibrium rather than build a new one. This resistance creates tension. The psyche knows, unconsciously, that change is required, yet it fears the uncertainty that change brings. The result is frantic effort, oscillation between extremes, and decisions that seem uncharacteristic. These actions are not signs of clarity, they are signs of inner conflict. Avoiding loss also means avoiding grief. Grief is a slow, non-linear process that cannot be controlled. It demands surrender, not action. For those who equate worth with productivity or control, grief feels like failure. Sudden actions become a way to bypass this process, to remain active rather than receptive. Yet inner balance cannot be forced. The psyche may temporarily stabilize through action, but unresolved loss eventually resurfaces. What is avoided returns in another form. The discomfort may manifest later as exhaustion, emptiness, or confusion. The psyche continues to seek resolution until loss is acknowledged and integrated. These unexpected actions reveal a truth about human nature. People do not fear loss itself as much as they fear what loss reveals about them. The suddenness of their behavior reflects how unprepared they are to face the inner void that loss creates. Action becomes a shield against awareness. In trying to restore balance and avoid confrontation, they expose the depth of their attachment and the fragility of their inner structure. Their behavior is not a reflection of certainty but of desperation for stability. The psyche moves instinctively, grasping for equilibrium, attempting to protect itself from disintegration while standing on the edge of a transformation it does not yet understand.